Right, Arvind. Yeah, welcome to Microsoft JD Conf 2022, and I'll let you get on with your talk, and I'll come back here in about 25 minutes. See you later.
Cool, cool. Then we can get started. So, hi, hello, and again, welcome to another session again on Java and a lot of stuff because I see a bunch of talks on Java, and I myself are taking notes on some of those things, and probably I would use them post the sessions. Today, I'm going to talk about collecting logs, metrics, traces from Azure platform into Elastic Stack. But I want to make it so general and also like give you some demo. We have very little time, so I just want to make sure that we take back something from the demo as well as like it will make easy for me to share you some information as well. So I'm going to make the presentation smaller and trying to do the demo as quickly as possible. So I'm Arvind. I work at Elastic as a developer advocate, on Twitter at Arvind Putrevu, and I also write a newsletter named devshorts.in. So basically, I've started to use Azure like say 3 years back, and then I kind of like the model of how this entire the platform structured like, and then it so happened that when I started to look at collecting data, when I started to look at understanding like what sort of information that is available for us to kind of really take into somewhere, or take into understanding of what's happening on the platform. I There are some basic pillars that I believe the Azure could really offer us that would help us to build this consciousness of how you could collect this data and then what you could use it for. So when I'm talking about that, I realize that there is subscriptions. There are things like subscriptions, which is very common for any account, and then like you have the resources. Anything and everything is a managed resource at Azure, and you have whole lot of things like everything is a resource actually. And then you have obviously the identity and access management, the accounting part, and then you have the resource group, which all of these resources like the NIC, network security groups, IP addresses, like VNets, VMs, whatnot, everything are grouped into these resource groups, again attached to a location. So that is one fantastic thing. So all of these are like some basic pillars through which you could start collecting data. But these are some fundamental things that you could understand when you're starting to think what are the details that I need to start thinking about like how do I collect information from the Azure. So before I move on to start explaining what Azure does and what sort of data that we are going to collect, I'm gonna put this data into Elastic Stack. So Elastic Stack is like a free and open stack where you have Elasticsearch at the heart and soul of everything. It's a search engine. A lot many people use it in regular Java programming, but also being used in various other use cases like observability using Kibana and security, again using different apps on Kibana, used by DevOps folks from development, like the regular search engineers, or like maybe infosec folks, or like if you are a product owner who wants to see how much does this app took to load this page, like just how the cache example was given previously in the Quarkus. So, like it is humanly impossible to showcase all the integrations or probably talk about every service in the Azure because there are so many services, and maybe there are definitely some tidbits that I would miss to start collecting data as well. There might be some differences. So I will only talk about some compute network storage areas, and then we will see one example on like Azure Spring Cloud and how you could start collecting data from a service microservice actually. So when I'm talking about compute network storage, again, there are important services like the virtual machine service, Azure VM, wherein a lot many people run their regular some businesses, like regular solutions on that. and then they use it for testing different use cases. Maybe the logs are very important to them, the metrics are very important. Then similarly you have the network wherein the VPC logs and all of these in private link and private link service logs. So all of these are very important components from the network point of view. Similarly, you have the storage, the databases, entire database service portfolio that you have, where people want to find out how much time my query took. So such sort of data could also be collected. So that is one another service area that you could look at. And then obviously that there are many other data services like that are available in Azure, like that is also a source for your data. But again, I want to specifically point out, like there are some specific services that you might need some additional steps to start collecting data. Maybe whatever I am going to talk about, like some generic steps, it might not work. Maybe you need to take a specialized approach to do that, or run a specific command to route it to the way that I am trying to explain you. So like I said, you know what are the resources, what are the things that are available on Azure. Then you should also understand like what and why and how of how you could what specific data source to collect, and what are the information that you really need. Generally, a lot many people talk about observability as like logs, metrics, traces, and then like I went on to explain like how you could unify it. Obviously it's been there. Logs it's a friend to developer from so many years. So you could definitely think of logs as like a behavior exhibit for your application, how your application is working. At the same time, for metrics, you want to know how your hardware is really performing, even though your logs is saying something. Maybe there is a disk issue, or there's a CPU issue, or something that you really want to take a note from an operational perspective. Then metrics is your another friend. And then like tracing is very helpful when you are really looking into your application on how your code is really performing, what flow it took, and like which query took more time. So from an application point of view, it would really help. So these are the three data sets, or three areas where naturally people would concentrate, but together it gives you more 360-degree view, which everyone is now like calling as observability, through which you'll be able to visualize what's happening in the infrastructure actually. So Azure being a very big platform, at least putting couple of things, overlaying one on each other, would give you a lot of knowledge on what's happening specifically. Now there are also alternatives, like what I was saying is like a specific tool, maybe even it is free, like Filebeat, MetricBeat, APM, all of them are free products that you could use and deploy in Azure and collect data. But at the same point of time, if you are looking for other open source alternatives, you have FluentBit for logs itself. You have Prometheus, which is a very popular metric store. But of course, for long-term storage, you might want to export data into another storage service like Elasticsearch. But then Prometheus for metric store. Then you have OpenTelemetry, which is another popular to do collecting the traces. Similarly, you have Eager. There are many alternatives that you could still use and start exporting the data. I'm just using one, which is Elastic. Is Azure also have something in store when you're thinking about collecting the data? Like say you have App Insights, which is another service that helps you to look into the application specific data. Then you have the popular Azure Monitor. I think if you might be seeing Monitor in on every left menu, most of them, and then you could click and see what's the data that is already available if you have enabled while configuring that service. So you could also export data from Azure Monitor. I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. So what services do you need to export the data? So usually this is a natural flow that the way that you could go and look at. You need a storage account. You could archive this data into storage, a specific storage account, or you could also go out and then create an event hub. So and then you could push all the data into the event hub and let your third party services or somebody access directly it from the event hub. So that is one another way to look at. I'm going to show a third way for Elastic as well in the demo, but these are some standard ways. I have used event hub many times to collect logs, to collect some information that I am using for a specific service. So event hub is a very popular way to collect or source information from Azure platform. So this is where my last slide of the presentation I want to spend some time. So like I said, there are different ways to approach this, collecting data. You could use the standard beats or any open source alternative collector, or else also you could use the Elastic agent and ship directly to the Elastic Cloud. This is getting really popular nowadays. And then you could also show the Elastic on Azure, a native service through which you could simply start collecting the data. Let me simply show the demo, and then like we could talk more about what are the specific information that I have. So when you go onto the platform, Microsoft Azure portal, you see you could type Elasticsearch directly here, or you could literally go and look at the services that are available. Elasticsearch is one native service that is available in the Azure cloud itself, and then you could create and deploy the Elasticsearch cluster. Thereby, you could integrate with any Azure service that is available. I'll show that as well, but then meanwhile, I'll just quickly show how you could create one. We'll not create it because it might take more than 2 to 3 minutes. Let's not waste the time, but then I'll just show you how you could do it. Say, for example, I have a resource group, and then you give JDConf, and then like say, let's keep it West US. As you could see, you could simply create this the cluster, but you could directly send the subscription activity logs and the Azure resource log for everything without doing much of the work, like what I was telling previously, like without using collectors, without using any beats. It's so simple. You just need to check this box. It is for all defined sources. There are a bunch of defined sources for Azure platform. You could go and look at that. And then like you could add tags and make this service. So what I have done in the interest of time is, like, I have created a ES service, and I have already configured the information just in case. I could also see what are the different services that are already available, and then if I want to monitor a specific service, I could click on and install that extension and do more of that. And then if I want to say make sure that I want to connect it from a specific VNet, I could go and look at a private link endpoint and make sure that I could connect it to the specific private link endpoint as well. So all of these are options that you could literally choose. So this is the standard Elasticsearch cluster. If I click on Kibana, it would use your Azure account and then take it to the Kibana page automatically and logs you in. So in minutes, you have something readily set up, which also collects your Azure logs and all of that setup. But that being said, the session is not just about this, but we will also see what is specifically that you could look at from a Java point of view. If you are deploying a Java app, I'm using Spring Cloud, again, the Pet Clinic application. Probably that is the most popularly demoed application for the Spring. So what I have done, again, in the interest of time, is like I have deployed a Pet Clinic application from the quick start. The link is already given, so you could also go and look at it if you can't find it online. So this is a sample application, and I have all the microservices running right from the place. Like I have the admin server, API gateway, customer service, vet service, visit service. I'm using the in-memory database. I'm not using the the SQL. You could also configure that the SQL database as well, and connect it to a database and start using it. So like I said, it's a simple sample, easy application that you could that you could use for Java. But the point here is, if I want to collect the logs, if I want to say trace this application, how would I do it? Or what are the ways that I could go and approach this one? Now, again, starting from the UI, again, it's so easy. If you want to do it right from the Azure console, you could also do it right from the command line as well. But I want to show it from here. So you could go to the diagnostic settings and add a diagnostic setting, and choose what are the log sources that you want to push off, and and send it to a partner solution, or like I said, in the previous areas, you could stream it to an event hub or a storage account. Uh, you could do many ways you could use this. So I'm just using the this particular deployment that I have. And let us say I want to name this as this name, and then if I click on save, it will save the setting, and then it will start shipping the data directly to it. So what I have done is, like, I started collecting the logs and information from this particular application um, to via a simple setting. So on the Azure, and then like it starts sending the data of these information to the cluster we have here. So this is one way, like, but how do you trace your application itself? How do I, like, say, see what my user is going through, and what my user is, like, clicking on, or like how the code is working? If I have a database, if I want to see how the query is working, so you could also go ahead and like trace this application as well. So Elasticsearch also has an APM functionality. If you are really new and if you might not know, excuse me. So your application can be traced, and you will be able to see the performance metrics of the application, also see the JVM information, and the heap space and a lot of that. So how do you trace this application? So what I'll do is, like, I'll do trace one customer's one service from this list of apps. You could again deploy it using that. So this entire app I have deployed using the AC command line. Of course, you could use the Terraform as well. So I've just used the same stuff. So let me do this. Okay, it has come. So like what I'll do is, like, I'll just use this Spring Cloud app update command line from the AC to kind of simply redeploy the customer service. One thing I forgot to explain you is, like, I have added a persistent storage to the Spring Cloud, Azure Spring Cloud service, through which the jar is being mounted onto the service, so that, like, it can leverage that. So here, if you go to the storage part, you can see I have added a storage account, and account name is Spring Cloud User Storage. In the storage, I have created a file share, and then I have added mounted that one onto the customer service. So using which, when I redeploy, the container will be restarted, and then you could start seeing data from it. So other are, like, the configuration details for the APM itself, like what name it should be visible onto the on the APM console that we have in Kibana. Then what are the packages that you want to trace, and then what is the server URL from the APM point of view? Like, say, if you want to like, where is that? If you want to copy the server URL, you have the server URL here, that you want to take a look at that. Then the secret token that is there, so that you could securely send the data to it. So let me quickly click on it. It might take a few minutes, very few minutes, and it will redeploy the container, and you could see that the container is being stopped and redeployed, and then you'll start seeing data. But meanwhile, let us go back and see if whether the logs that we started to collect from the service has arrived, and then is showing up in the place itself. So if you click on the left menu, then you have the observability. So yeah, you have the logs. So these are the old ones, so don't worry about it. Just check the last 5 minutes or so. Let me increase the font size a bit. Okay. So if you see here, I have this like, the logs are not coming yet. Maybe there's some difference here. Let me go to the log stream itself to see why the logs are not coming. Can go to the stream and see. Okay, stream live. Yeah. there are some logs, but not everything. We could also filter the logs by, like, event dot dataset, to see what specific logs are being collected. So I am looking at Azure Spring Cloud logs. It says failed to find message. I don't know why, what's wrong. But then it doesn't have active logs right now being collected, but it has some old logs that are available, like say from last 1 day or so, that is being shown. I have no idea why it is saying no fail to find message. But you also have the activity logs being collected that we could see. Let me see if I have that. Yeah. So there are some activity logs. If you increase the probably the time, maybe there will be more, because we just started collecting now. There are very little bit happening on the cloud at this point of time. So that's why you might not see many activities that are happening. Meanwhile, you could also go and see if I could, if the application has started. Let me increase it. So the application has been deployed. So let us see uh, the services, the APM services that are available. Um, so we, as you have seen that we have used JD Conf Pet Clinic again. It is not using the latest one. Let's apply to the last 15 minutes, and then like it says comparison with the day before. That's why you see the trend. I've been testing this application. If you add that, it will show you the average, and then you will see different metrics about how your app is performing, and you could also see the throughput, what your application is doing. If you have a database, like, you could go deeper onto how the database is performing as well. So that is there. Let's not go into the dependencies part. I'll also show you the JVM information as well, with respect to how the CPU, system memory usage, heap memory usage. If you have a issue with the heap itself, so you might want to take a look at here. So if you have errors configured, like, I like, you could easily use that to generate that. And then the service map itself shows you, like, the various information, and then more details onto how things are flowing. So this way you could identify the entire stuff easily. If you have different environments, you could also tag that, so that, like, you could compare it with, across your QA staging and your production environments. You could search your information through the through different variations itself. So yeah, let me show you something. So when you are looking at one specific trace, you could also go ahead and, like, look into the specific logs from that particular trace. So it is connected, so that you could look at logs. You could look at, we are not collecting metrics yet, so you could also look at the metrics from the container. You could go and see what are the various dashboards look like. Say, for example, if I want to take a look at, so this is the app that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the regular the Kibana dashboards that everyone usually builds around. So say, for example, if I want to understand how is the exact application console logs, or what are the various things that are happening across, so you could go and look at those. Again, last 15 minutes, I'll just see the last 1 hour, or, like, say, 1 day. Okay, today, let us put today. So then you might see more data, like, you might see how the data is being shipped, how the logs are coming. So all of these are interesting information to share and take a look at. I have just demoed a very small tip of the iceberg, and there could be more that you could do right from the command line as well as from the platform. I hope you have got something out of the session. I have a slide wherein I could show you more information about how this entire you could learn this entire blog, or, like, the step-by-step information on this thing. So this is also given in the resources links, and more blogs are also given, so that you could follow along. So if you have any questions, I'm around, and feel free to drop down and ask me more questions about it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Arvind. This was amazing. Let me bring out the next speaker.